given his little soldier salute as they are placing his father's coffin on the caisson. And where are they heading? To Arlington, okay? So, after this emotional event, the processional continued its journey to Arlington National Cemetery, and it was at 2:54 p.m. that the processional arrived at Arlington. And when the processional reached the burial site chosen at Arlington, the Marine Band played the Star-Spangled Banner. And one of the members of that Marine Band was sousaphone player Ed Simmons, and he was quoted as saying the following: "I thought as we were going up to the gravesite, because it was quite a steep hill, that my God, there are muscles I haven't used in months. Probably what sticks in my mind most was the casket. The humongous weight of it, seeing these body bearers struggling to carry it up the hill to the gravesite, it was really a struggle." Now when we go to DC, we're going to start at the entrance of Arlington, and we're going to stop at this little museum store they have or whatever. Then we're going to make that walk up to Kennedy's gravesite. And it is quite a steep walk if you've ever been there. And so you can imagine these guys trying to get this taken care of. Now after the Marine Band played the banner, the United States Air Force Pipe Band played Mist-Covered Mountain. Why would they have the United States Air Force Pipe Band play anything? What's a pipe band? What's the origin of a pipe band? Ireland, right? And the Kennedys were Irish, okay? Now one of the members of that pipe band was a fella, and I got him up here somewhere. I rearranged these darn things, and I still can't figure out where I put them. What did I do with that? Jeez, I'm getting old and can't remember. But anyway, I'll show it to you a little bit later. But Jerry Cashin was one of the members of the pipe band that played Mist-Covered Mountain. Well, after that was done, the casket was removed from the caisson and carried to the grave. And this is kind of interesting, as the president's body was laid to rest, 50 fighter jets representing all 50 states flew over the cemetery simultaneously at that point. And the jets were followed up by Air Force One in a final tribute to the commander-in-chief who had given his life for his country. And Assistant Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff stated about his experience, he said, "Suddenly seeing this flight of fighters came across, just screaming jets, with one plane missing from the formation. That was heart-wrenching. Then Air Force One coming from the same way. I never saw a plane that size fly so low in my life. And it came over and tipped its wings before it took off and gained altitude." Why did it tip its wings? As a tribute to the president. And I think I told you this once before, and this wouldn't even compare, but we were in Arlington one year, and there must have been it's a working cemetery, so they have funerals all the time of military personnel. And we were right kind of by the museum, and we were just finishing our tour. And these jets came over, 3 jets came over, it was incredible, just low to the deck, and then the one in the middle took off and went straight up. Still gives me goosebumps. It was unbelievable, and that was the tribute to that soldier who had been buried that day. I just by chance saw that. I'd never seen it before, but it was incredible. So those types of things do happen. Well, after that happened, a squad of 7 riflemen fired 3 volleys. Okay, 7 times 3 is a 21 gun salute, followed by a 21 cannon salute, followed by the playing of taps. Do you all know what taps is? Okay, anybody know taps? Anybody want to whistle that?
It's really emotional.
Yeah, it's you'll get a chance to see it. Taps was played by an Army bugler by the name of Sergeant Keith Clark, and he was the lead trumpet player in the United States Army Band, and he had received a phone call early that morning ordering him to sound taps at the funeral. What a responsibility that would be. And Clark was later quoted as saying, "So I was there to play at 12:15 p.m. It was a rainy day and we weren't allowed to wear overcoats. So I stood there in the drizzle for 3 hours. It was like the Speaker of the House saying, 'Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.' That is not at all hard to say, but do it then and do it there, that's when the pressure comes. That's when it becomes difficult all of a sudden. A lot of people can sing in the shower. point being, a lot of people can sing real well in the shower, but you get them in front of a crowd and they're gonna be bad. Okay, the point being is that it'd be easy for the Speaker of the House saying, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. But when you get in front of a national television audience and all those people in there, you might choke. That's his point. Well, to be in view of the television cameras, Clark was ordered to stand 5 yards from the squad of riflemen who fired the 3 volleys, and then it was followed by that 21-gun cannon salute. So when Sergeant Clark was called upon to sound taps at 3:08 p.m., all that gunfire had momentarily rendered him deaf. Can you imagine? He's not going to be able to hear himself play. Okay? Well, on the 6th note, Sergeant Clark fluttered off key and then went on to complete taps without applause. And I'm going to show you this. It's incredible. You're hearing him play it, and all of a sudden he misses the key. Just misses it badly. Well, in the book Death of a President that was written by William Manchester, Manchester wrote how the broken note would be, quote, widely regarded as a deliberate effect, like a catch in your voice or swiftly stifled sob. When Clark was later asked about the broken note, he simply said, I missed a note under pressure. But it was so fitting, and I'll continue. The bugle that he played, you'll see at Arlington National Cemetery in the museum. It's pretty cool to see. Well, Tom Sherlock, who is the senior historian at Arlington National Cemetery, remarked in 2001 how Sergeant Clark's flawed sounding of taps seemed entirely fitting. He said, it showed the tension that the nation felt. It's part of the emotion. It's when a speech is well delivered and a voice cracks because it's an emotional time. It's what should happen. And in that way, it almost personalized it and made it immortal. You'll have to hear it. It was just incredible because it just was something that the guy just hit the note wrong. His explanation as a stoic bugler is that he couldn't hear well because of the, tremendous firing prior to him doing it. But a lot of people think the emotion is probably maybe what caused it. Okay, but it's quite fitting. You'll see it. Now, after the playing of taps, the American flag that draped the president's coffin was folded by the military casket bearers and given to Mrs. Kennedy. And at 3:13 p.m. on the 25th of November, Jackie Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Ted Kennedy all took turns lighting the eternal flame. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about the eternal flame. It was Mrs. Kennedy's final tribute to the fallen leader of the free world. It's a flame that still burns brightly today. It burns 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I will tell you that they recently replaced it, probably 2 years ago, so it's a little bit different. So obviously it had to be turned off during that time, and it's a much bigger flame now than it was when it was first put in 63. But anyway, this eternal flame was Jackie Kennedy's personal tribute to the man, quote, who asked not what his country could do for him, but what he could do for his country. Now, after the burial, this is kind of interesting. After the burial, the Kennedy party left Arlington Cemetery. Later that night, Agent Clint Hill escorted Jackie and Robert back to Arlington so they could view the burial site and eternal flame at night privately. They both knelt and prayed for about 15 minutes and then left. You know what they did from the time they left? What did Mrs. Kennedy do from the time they left Arlington Cemetery to the time she came back with Clint Hill that night? Anybody want to guess what she did? Well, she hosted an event. Think about what we talked about yesterday. Yeah, hosted her son's birthday party. That's what she did. Hosted a birthday party for her son. Okay, let's talk about some final thoughts on the death of John F. Kennedy. I'm going to give you 5 final thoughts and quotes about his life and death. Number 1, later after reflection, Mrs. Kennedy summed up the life of her late husband by taking a paragraph from his famous book, Profiles in Courage. And if you're interested in this, you can find it on a book called Quotations of John F. Kennedy on page 14. It says, the courage of life is often a less dramatical spectacle than the courage of the final moment, but is no less than a magnificent mixture of triumph and tragedy. A man does what he must, in spite of personal consequences, in spite of obstacles and dangers and pressures, and that is the basis of all human morality. That's how she summed up her husband's life. Now, number two, and this is probably true, after the death of John F. Kennedy, politicians, friends, media, and other authors really inflated what the president had accomplished in his first 1,000 days in office. That's a kind of a big deal. They wrote a book called 1,000 Days. A president is judged on how good he's going to be, or how good maybe he was, by his first 1,000 days in office, which is how many years? 3-ish, less than 3. And here's what one journalist wrote, and I think he's right on. Robbed of his years, he is being rewarded and honored in death as he never was in life. Deprived of the place he sought in history, he has been given a place in legend. And I think that's true. If he serves 2 terms, we remember him as probably a very good president. But in death, he turns into a legend. Okay? Now, number 3, one of President Kennedy's quotes best summed up the tragedy of his death and what could have been. This is what he said one time. It has been recently suggested that whether I serve 1 or 2 terms in the presidency, I will find myself at the end of that period of what might be called the awkward age. Too old to begin a new career and too young to write my memoirs. Because if he'd have served 2 terms, how old would he have been? Just a little, 50, a little over 50. Well, pretty early to maybe get a new career, and too late to get a new career and too early to write your memoirs because you've got a lot of life left. Okay? Rose Kennedy, I think this is a great quote. How many tragedies that poor lady been through? Rose Kennedy, after facing many tragic deaths within her family, said, "It has been said, time heals all wounds. I do not agree. The wounds remain. In time, the mind, protecting its sanity, covers them with scar tissue and the pain lessens, but it is never gone." Okay? Now, how many have heard of Camelot? Kennedy's presidency referred to as Camelot. Anybody heard that? That never occurred until after his death. A lot of people mistake that they called the Kennedy presidency Camelot during the presidency. They did not. Here's how it came about. Many times in the history after his assassination, they referred to the Kennedy years in the White House as Camelot. Now, without looking, do you know what Camelot is? What was Camelot? We know? King Arthur and his court? Well, it just happened to be a Broadway musical about the court of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. Ironically, it opened up on Broadway in December of 1960, just weeks after Kennedy's election. Okay? Now, the Kennedy administration was compared to that imaginary place with high ideals and chivalry and knights in shining armor and all of its medieval legend. So sometimes people refer to Kennedy's time in office as Camelot. But you need to understand that it didn't happen until after he was assassinated. Nobody referred to the Kennedy years as Camelot during the time he served in office. What happened is after the president's death, Jackie Kennedy summoned a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist by the name of Theodore H. White to the family compound at Hyannisport, Massachusetts, just a week after his death. And White was a confidant of President Kennedy during the 1960 presidential campaign. I showed you a little bit of video called Making of the President 1960. That was done by Theodore White. Well, Jackie's thought process is she wanted to have Theodore White rescue her husband from what she referred to as the bitter old men who write history. She wanted to make sure, in a way, that his place in legend was secured, that he didn't get criticized in death. And I'm going to tell you, when things came out later in life, he had plenty of reasons to be criticized, okay, for things he was involved in. So Mrs. Kennedy really struggled to find what she considered an appropriate classical metaphor for her husband's presidency. So in the echoes of a favorite Broadway musical of the time, Jacqueline Kennedy found her heroic metaphor and cast the spell of Camelot over the American people with the help of White. He wrote a 1,000-word essay about how the Kennedy presidency compared to Camelot, how it became a defining document in America's political and cultural life. Theodore White invented the term Camelot for the Kennedy presidency. And again, it's important to understand that it never was referred to Camelot until after the president had died. And Jackie Kennedy was the one responsible. Okay? All right. Now, that's the end of the notes I gave you. Now I'm going to have you take a few, and you can take them on just the pad I gave you there. Just going to give you some tidbits about the Kennedy assassination I think you'll enjoy. Some tidbits. Okay, so write down what you think is important. But I didn't give these to you because I like to tell you. Okay, one. Here's an interesting statistic. In 1917, ironically, the year Kennedy was born, Congress passed a law making it a federal offense to threaten to kill the President of the United States. That happened in 1917. Ironically, the same year Kennedy was born, Congress passed a law that made it a federal offense to threaten to kill the President of the United States. That happened in 1917, that it became a federal offense if you threatened the life of the President. What didn't it cover? If you killed the President. It wasn't until 1965, after President Kennedy was assassinated, that it became a federal offense to kill the President of the United States. It was a federal offense to threaten to kill him from 1917 to 1965, but there was nothing on the books on what happened if you killed him. Isn't that weird? So in 1965, it became a federal offense to kill the President. Anybody know how many presidents we've had die at the hands of an assassin over our course of our history? No? 4. Who was the first? Abraham Lincoln. And when was he elected president? Anybody know? 1860. Who was our second president assassinated? Anybody know? James. You guys. Did you guys take history last year? James Garfield. And when was he elected? 1880. Who was the next president assassinated? He was elected in 1900. William McKinley. Elected in 1900. And John Kennedy was assassinated, and he was elected when? 1960. All 4 assassinated presidents elected in 0 years. Okay? Now, let's get a little crazier. How many presidents have died in office? Anybody know? We know of 4, because 4 were assassinated. Anybody want to guess? That'd be 5. Warren Harding would be 6. William Henry Harrison died of pneumonia just hours after the inauguration. So we've had 7 presidents that have died while serving as President of the United States. Now we know that Lincoln was elected in 1860. We know Garfield was elected in 1880. We know McKinley was elected in 1900. And we know that Kennedy was elected in 1960. Well, William Henry Harrison was elected in 1840. William Henry Harrison, 1840. President Harding, who died in office, was elected in 1920. Now this is a little shaky, but...
Who was that?
Warren Harding. And Franklin Roosevelt, who actually was elected how many times? 4, but he was elected in 1940. So all 7 presidents that have died in office, all were elected in a 0 year. What's the most famous assassination attempt that failed that you might be aware of in your era? Ronald Reagan, 1980, just so you know. Okay, so that's a little bit of a woo, a little bit of a jinx there. Okay? So, just so you know, 4 American presidents assassinated, all elected in a 0 year. 7 died in office, all elected in 0.
Who were the other 3 died in office?
William Henry Harrison, 1840. Warren Harding, H-A-R-D-I-N-G, 1920, and Franklin Roosevelt, who was elected 4 times, so once in 1940. So just a little bit of tidbits. All right, you ever heard of the Lincoln-Kennedy coincidences?
Yeah.
I'm going to tell them to you. You don't have to write them down. I'll give you a copy. Okay, but I want you to listen. Okay, Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946, 100 years apart. Okay? Lincoln was elected president in 1860, Kennedy in 1960, 100 years apart. True or false? Both men were deeply involved in civil rights for Negroes. True. True or false? Both men were assassinated on a Friday. That's true. True or false? Both men were assassinated in the presence of their wives. Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater with his wife sitting right next to him. Jackie was, okay? Did each wife lose a son while living in the White House? Okay, Patrick died, but also Lincoln lost a son also when he was president. Lincoln was killed in Ford's Theater. Kennedy in a Ford automobile, a Lincoln. It's telling you. Both men were succeeded by vice presidents named Johnson. Andrew Johnson, Lyndon Johnson. Both vice presidents were Southern Democrats. Both vice presidents were former senators. Andrew Johnson, who replaced Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, who replaced Kennedy, was born in 1908, 100 years apart. The last name of Kennedy's private secretary was Lincoln. The first name of Lincoln's private secretary was John. Just throwing it at you. John Wilkes Booth, who killed Abraham Lincoln, was born in 1839. Lee Harvey Oswald, who killed President Kennedy, was born in 1939, 100 years apart. Both assassins were murdered before going to trial. Booth shot Lincoln from a theater. Oswald was apprehended in a theater. Let's get it. Okay, last name Lincoln, last name Kennedy. Each have 7 letters. Now, it wouldn't be fair to go Johnson and Johnson because they're the same last name. So, Andrew Johnson and Lyndon Johnson each have 13 letters. And John Wilkes Booth and Lee Harvey Oswald each have 15.